There is no sign or any other clue that would make one think that this ordinary-looking hole in the ground near a beach in Crimea could be an extremely important historic site. It's a stone quarry, a historic stone quarry in which the stones have been cut from the bedrock using a technology that far surpasses our so-called modern equipment. It is obvious that large chunks of stone have been quarried, taken away. But how did they separate them from the bedrock? This is how we do it in our supposedly modern quarries, and these monster stone cutting machines leave this type of tool marks behind themselves. Vladimir visits a modern stone quarry in this very same region where absolutely same type of stone has been quarried. The monster stone cutting machines leave serious marks behind. 12 centimeters wide in this case, although the stone that has been cut off is much smaller than the chunks that have been quarried in the historic quarry that we saw earlier. The marks left by the teeth of the monster machine are very clearly visible. The walls of the historic beach quarry are radically different. The width of the cutting is some 3-4 millimeters only. The slices of stone were large, some 1, 2 or even more meters long. No doubt we do have thin discs for cutting stone nowadays that would leave that thin marks behind. However, their diameter is far less than a couple of meters. They are used by jewelers, not in stone quarries. If we manufacture discs with a large diameter and such a thickness just 2-3 millimeters, they will break after 1 or 2 seconds of workload. Even lightweight, portable stone cutting equipment has blades that are much thicker than 2-3 millimeters. And here is an easy example for non-specialists. Imagine just a simple chainsaw for cutting wood. Wood is much softer material than stone. And still, if you imagine you cut something much harder with your wood chainsaw, still the marks will be much bigger and much rougher than those seen in the historic beach quarry. And just imagine what kind of rough, monstrous marks would leave this type of thing. There are other techniques for cutting stone, like for example, this is a wire saw. It cuts stone with diamond wire. But all of them, without an exception, share the same disadvantages. It either leaves tool mark that is much wider than the ancient one, or the cuttings that it can produce are way smaller than those seen in the historic quarry. This is a water jet cutting technology. It can definitely produce smooth cuttings like those in the historic quarry, but the scale would be pathetically dwarfish compared to the old stuff. The depth of the historic cuttings vary. The depth is not uniform throughout the full cutting, which is yet another proof that it was not done with some sort of disc instrument. Gradually and slowly changing depth of the cuttings would have been observed in case a huge disc was used. But that is not the case. The depth changes constantly and quickly. And not only it is very narrow, marks of any hard tool being used on the stone are absolutely absent throughout the quarry. One is left with the impression that as if a beam of energy simply disintegrated the stone. The cuttings that are now observed on the walls are just the casual leftovers of the actual cutting. The actual cutting was much more than these 20-30 centimeters that they overcut. Apparently, making such cuttings was a rather easy task for them, and that is why they didn't care if they cut 30-40 centimeters extra. This wouldn't be the case in a modern stone quarry, because that would lead to enormous wastage of resources and energy. For example, the stone that was removed from this particular spot was about a meter wide and much more than 1 meter high. The height cannot be measured at this point because of the thick layer of rubble and dust on the floor. The extra cutting goes more than 30 centimeters deep into the bedrock, and still it is only 3-4 millimeters wide. Now let's return to the modern quarry and see with our own eyes how primitive it looks compared to the old stuff. But separating stone from the bedrock is only part of the story. What about transporting it? That wouldn't have been a very enjoyable pastime. This is a typical modern setup that would do the job. But what about the historic quarry? What kind of technique did they use? My history teacher at school told me that this was the frontier technology in old times. But when I look at the elegant and precise cuttings on the wall of the old quarry, they don't seem like a work of mule riders. There are no remains of any transportation system, at least not visible ones. Well, even the floor is not visible as such. It is almost completely covered. But yet at few spots it is still visible. And it doesn't really at all look suitable for any sort of railway-like transportation because of the steps. Since the cutting technique is so elegant, maybe the transportation technique was elegant as well. Our planet is full of megaliths. Many of them are made of truly gigantic stones that our so-called modern equipment can handle with great difficulty or cannot handle at all. My teacher at school told me that the poor ancient people suffered dragging such enormous stones, led by some sort of naive belief that the bigger the stones, the more the gods will be pleased with them. She heard it from the big scientists. Those sit in very expensive leather chairs, and when they talk, everybody must believe them, because they speak with such a confidence as if they have seen the mule riders with their own eyes. I think that the ancient stone builders used such huge stone blocks simply because it was very easy for them. For us, it is some sort of nightmare to handle such heavy stones, but that doesn't mean that they had the same problem. But some people prefer to stick to the fairy tale of the mule riders no matter what. A very good example is an email I received. Quote, "A perspective on the Great Pyramid and other voluminous projects. I personally can move 10 yards or 20,000 pounds of loose material per day in a wheelbarrow. It would take me 2,500 years to move that volume means of the pyramid, but I don't need to worry about. 5,000 guys could shift that volume over and up probably within 3 years, taking into account laziness and holidays. Toss in the equation fine Egyptian beer at the top of the ramp, with barmaids alternating with disappointed grandfathers, and that schedule would be easily met, if not beaten, by many months. Well, I say, why just wheelbarrows? Why not put them on bicycles even? All those tiny megaliths/feathers. But specifically for people who think along those lines, and that the barmaids could have built the Great Pyramid, I'll give you additional proofs that this beach quarry is indeed a historic site. The high-tech cutting marks are enough proof themselves, but some people have difficulty grasping such things, and especially for them I will provide a bit of clarification. First of all, there are no remains of any sort of industrial setup anywhere around the quarry. If this was an abandoned modern quarry, there should have been at least some minor traces of the full setup. It doesn't evaporate so fast. There isn't anything like this around. It is just a hole in the ground, out there in the fields near the beach. Next, there are colonies of very well-fed bats inside the quarry, and those colonies don't just land there from somewhere else. They develop with time. It takes long time. The presence of the bats by itself proves that these quarries have been abandoned and vacant for a very long time. Graffiti are found in great abundance in this quarry. Most of them belong to the 20th century. It seems that in the 40s, the graffiti artists were particularly prolific because many of the dates point to that time period. In addition, erosion can be observed on some of the walls that have cuttings on them. This type of erosion shows clearly that partially that the bottom part of the wall was either underwater or it was buried under debris for a prolonged period of time. This type of erosion doesn't develop just in a couple of years. The floor is covered, at least at the location, the only location that they tried to dig at, was covered with a very thick layer of powdered stone, maybe some 40 centimeters. Did it all fall from the ceiling, or was the stone quarried meant to be powdered to make a geopolymer? Or is the powder just a byproduct of the cutting that was used, that was decomposing the stone, apparently? Actually, at this point, we know very, very little about our true history. That is why I'm calling for experienced remote viewers and past life regressionists who would like to contribute, to volunteer in the project of making at least a basic timeline of our true history. Few other locations in the vicinity also look like as if they have been part of a quarrying project. They are in the open, they are not in the ground. They also display clear signs of erosion. The blocks that have been quarried must have been of really megalithic proportions, and still we see the same very fine cuttings of just 4 millimeters, 3 or 4. Besides erosion, we again see graffiti from the 40s on the quarried walls, and again no hint of any sort of industrial setup that could have transported these megalithic blocks from the location, in case somebody still doubts that these are some abandoned modern quarries. For those who wish to study the historic techniques of quarrying stone, probably the area of Sevastopol is the best spot on earth to be. What I have been calling a historic quarry so far probably belongs to an ancient civilization. That's one. Number two is the modern quarry that I showed you, and that is only the beginning. It seems that two other historic civilizations have left their hallmarks in the area as well. Next, we will visit, together with Vladimir, the so-called Inkerman historic quarries. Well, they could have been quarries, but they surely are very large cavities. Large amounts of stone have been removed from the site in the past. On the top there are some signs of erosion. They consist of at least a dozen of such large cavities in the bedrock. There has been no quarry at this location during the known history. That's why they're considered prehistoric. Everything seems to be okay so far in the story, just this small detail that this is how the prehistoric man looked like according to the history textbooks. And on the walls of the Inkerman quarries we see machine tool marks left by this type of equipment. Everything else, besides this minor discrepancy, appears to be fine.
это были перекрытия. Скорее всего, вот эти пещеры использовали средневековье для каких-то хозяйственных. Отчетливо все в следах осколков.
То есть здесь...
Кровопролитнейшая битва была за каждую высоту.
This stonework appears to be very similar, if not identical, to the stonework in the Chinese underground quarries or caves that I commented on in the episode of the survivors devoted to China. A different type of equipment or a different mining technique appears to have been used exactly below the ceiling. I think that the reason for this is that they used a different tool to make the initial penetration in the solid stone, and then when they had a room for the other tool, they would put that in and start working, and the second tool would do most of the work then. From this very place, if one zooms in to the hill on the opposite side of the valley, is visible yet the fourth style of massive stonework that belongs most likely to yet another completely separate civilization. These are not quarries this time. It is extremely likely that this is part of the huge, gigantic, complex network, vast network of underground cities that is found in parts of Europe, Africa, and Asia, and at certain locations gets laid barren when the erosion eats up the land. I have few separate videos with details about this network of stone underground cities found mainly in Turkey. If you decide to subscribe to my channel, you can do it on this very page that you are watching this video on by clicking subscribe here. And then if you wish to receive instant notifications when I make new video, because that is not automatic when you subscribe, you need to check this box here, send me notifications for this channel.
Чтобы их выносить.
глубокий какой этот пропил-то. Ты можешь туда что-нибудь засунуть?
Да, у меня есть специальная штука. Для этого дела моя измерительная линейка. Как раз для этого дела подойдет.
Очень глубокий пропил. То есть это не то, что очень, а чрезвычайно глубокий. Смотри.
Сейчас мы это померим.
А где у нас этот
Сейчас я выпрямлю.
щуп, который засунуть-то?
Щуп.
Эндоскоп.
А он не про это, он 5-миллиметровый, а тут меньше, чем 5 миллиметров. Тут еще на миллиметр. Я выпрямлю.
Is it possible that we have the ruins of a relatively developed ancient civilization stretching over a couple of continents right in front of our eyes and we don't notice it? Even to the point that we don't even have a name for it? This is not a joke or exaggeration. In this documentary, I'll show you that this is exactly the case, and I will let the images of the ruins speak for themselves. These rooms were part of an elegant dwelling not so long ago, but as all-devouring time stripped their walls of the decoration, they no longer feel attractive to the eye. And in the same manner as time strips the stylish elements from the rock-cut ruins, they become less and less interesting to the common man. A magnificent, richly decorated castle, when defeated by time, turns into this. Probably you're already thinking, forget about common man, this is work for historians. What do they say about these ruins? Actually, a very small portion of these ruins is given the respect a historic site deserves, and I will start my narration with selected jokes from the results of the so-called research that the official academia has conducted on such sites. Via Amerina, north of Rome. If you look for an official information about it, you will find something of this sort. They will tell you it's a Roman road. Then they will continue with stories about a certain Roman guy who made it in 2 years. And then they will kindly provide educational sketches for you, something of this sort. But if you actually go to the place, you will find out that it is interesting because of the impressive rock-cut ruins on the side, and it is only a small, very small portion of it that has some Roman paving in the middle. So, in other words, because of a short, unimpressive segment of pavement, they are misleadingly crediting the Romans with the rock-cut ruins. And it is only in specialized literature where one will find the notes like, and this Roman site was built on the ruins of an older track. Track? This is track. And this is track. This is not a track. This is probably something like a marketplace. And only the tip of it is sticking from the ground. The lower levels are not even excavated. Of course, such an excavation will be extremely dangerous because it may damage or move few pebbles of the precious Roman pavement. And by the way, the dwellings or the shops on both sides of the road must have been very beautiful while still in use, because they had remains of plastering and various borders.
And also the beautiful cornices, cornice-like work around here also.
Now let's go to the impressive rock-cut amphitheater at Sutri. It is rather huge. As you can see, its style is clearly that of the rock-cut ruins I've been showing you so far. Now what to do? It's a problem. There is no Roman pavement to declare the amphitheater Roman. Not a big problem. Academics are skilled in forgery. That's why they made this Roman-looking gate. Yes, I'm not joking. This patch that clearly belongs to another style is 100% modern addition, and the excuse for adding a patch that visibly belongs to another style is as follows. Well, although the local people somehow made it in a different style, the full amphitheater must have been Roman, and that's why we can put a Roman-looking gate. Must have been. Excellent. Exactly like this, one small lie at a time, our history is stolen and distorted beyond recognition. But Italy is neither the only place where such rock cut ruins are found, nor the main one. For example, in terms of amphitheaters, we have very similar ones in Petra, Jordan and in Tiermes, Spain. The style is not just very close, it is absolutely identical. Again, we are told that the Romans built it, and of course there is a slight problem. There shouldn't have been really that many Romans in Petra, but that is easily solved. They came there and built it. And the only proof, of course, is that it perfectly matches the rest of the stories that they are telling. No, there were no Romans taking short trips to exotic locations, nor any other foreigners. Built it as usual the people who lived in the rock-cut ruins next to it. And as far as the dwellings, people are told that these are actually tombs, burial chambers, although there is no proof of it whatsoever, and although they look like residences with water supply and everything else, reaching in some cases 10 floors deep below ground level. But to avoid unnecessary curiosity, everything is easily solved because simply they are not being excavated. But the sites of this civilization, without a name, the civilization of the rock cutters, were not mistakenly attributed only to the Romans. No, basically to any culture that could be handy taken from the regional history where such ruins would be found. For example, if you browse popular sources of so-called history for the keyword Domus de Janus, these are the type of rock-cut ruins, that's how they are called in Sardinia at least. With great authority, they will assure you that these are rock-cut tombs, without a doubt. On the other hand, if you read specialized literature of those who have been actually studying them out there in the fields, you will read that they were reused as burials by simple people who were putting the dead members of their tribe in Domus Deiana or any other ruin or even natural cavity that they could find handy. Basically, they were reusing them, but who would read specialized literature for every single thing? This is impossible. People just take for granted what's there in the popular literature and the history textbooks and assume that it must be a summary of the actual scientific finds, which unfortunately way too often is not at all the case. The Corinth Canal could possibly be yet another example how the credit of constructing the marvelous engineering achievements by the old civilization is given to somebody else that it doesn't belong to. In the official history of the canal, they will give you all kinds of details, how engineers were thinking about it, building it for many years, and so on and so forth. But just look at what we see on its wall. Most likely, at the time of its official construction, they only cleaned it up and possibly remodeled it. And as far as the official explanation of the old ruins, that's, well, people in the past were attempting to make such a canal, but they were unsuccessful. And this is an old photo from the times of the so-called construction of the canal. This stone work could possibly be predating the canal's so-called construction, and it could be even polygonal. The big stone blocks seem a bit out of proportion compared to the usual size of stone used during a typical construction some 100 years ago or so. Now, many of you are probably wondering, how is it possible that all these rock-cut ruins belong to unknown civilization if some of them bear inscriptions belonging to well-known and well-studied cultures and civilizations? Like, for example, this is probably a legitimate inscription on a officially so-called Etruscan necropolis. And all the other rock-cut ruins would belong to their respective local cultures, as the Quackademia is assuring us. What's the problem with this? Here are the problems with this simple solution. This is your Etruscan necropolis in Turkey. It even has the typical design of the two lions facing each other, which is so common for many Etruscan necropolises. And here are your Etruscan necropolises in Greece. Even the inscriptions of them look so similar. And here are your perfectly Etruscan looking tombs in Jordan. Somewhat far away from Etruria, isn't it? And here are your Etruscan ruins in Sicily, again, hundreds of kilometers away from their homeland, the so-called Etruria in central Italy. And these are just few out of the many parallels in architecture. In the next episodes, we'll see the parallels in their rock-cut roads. Decide for yourself what are the odds that in various locations, in some cases separated from each other by thousands of kilometers, the simple folks will decide one day, I'm too bored today. Maybe I should start digging into the solid hard bedrock a road, even though I can drive my donkey cart. On the ground, I no longer wish to do so. Instead, I will dig meters deep road, kilometers long, in the solid bedrock. Yes, very strange, at least for us. Rock-cut roads are there all the way from Israel to Spain and Portugal and possibly even North America. And all these roads have some sort of curious marks that I find no way to associate with any model of carts. Some of them are quadratic, while others leave the impression as if some sort of a tank or a bagger drove on it. And they're all the same, from China to maybe North America. In addition to that, we have single tracks, which I also find very difficult to associate with any possible model of cart. And again, all these are found again and again in various far away from each other regions. And on the top of all this, these rock-cut ruins of the unknown civilization that from now on I will call the civilization of Egil for short. They were not built all at once, but several distinct layers can be seen, made probably over a very extended period of time. And in addition to everything said so far, I will be showing you lots of parallels which not only connect faraway locations, but they connect them with multiple threads, so to say. Meaning the same distinct layers are visible at the different places, and on the top of that, each individual layer has similarities in architecture. On one side, there is no doubt that the people who cut all this in the rock were closely connected with each other, although they lived in separate continents. And yet, on the other hand, these sites, some of them bear undeniable connection to very simple local cultures. This seems like some sort of a predicament, but it will seem like this only until we believe the descriptions of these local cultures given by the mainstream quackademia. Usually what they do is they show you an image of a broken piece of ceramics, and basically that's all the proof in terms of facts that they can provide for all the stories that they will be telling you about the particular culture. The broken piece of ceramics is to create the psychological impression that some field work has been going on, and so they will assure you that the people led very basic lives of agricultural pursuits, and yes, some special ones could do trade. International travel would be an exception, things like that. But if you read an original old text and see what the people of those times would say with their own words, the picture is radically different. The people had a radiant, exciting lives, connecting with nature spirits. They appointed us their leaders, not thieves and liars like us, but really brave men or magicians who were connecting to higher beings. Those beings, you can call them gods or guardian spirits, whatever. They were interacting with men, teaching them. Maybe travel was not carried out only with physical means as we do nowadays, but possibly also through magical doorways, like doors cut in the stone that don't open, at least for our standards.
When visiting these places, I sometimes like to imagine the possibilities of what they may have been like when new. There were little hints here and there of the more sophisticated architecture that these sites may have once had. It was evident that these structures were not crudely carved stone caves, but once had things like smooth plaster, Romanesque columns, elegant carvings and statues. And even some tiled walls remained. You see these things, and piece by piece it begins to paint a more vivid picture. And after days of walking among these sites, we visited a more modern, more recent historic site known as the Cathedral of Orvieto, dated from the 14th century. When you go inside, it is very heavily decorated, very ornate, and very colorful. It was different from the old ruins, for sure, but it also felt in some ways familiar somehow. And while walking through this place, I spotted a column inside that was heavily worn and had lost its layer of paint. And it looked just like plain old stone. Something that would have fit right in at the older ruins. So now when I look at these more ancient sites, I can't help but wonder if they could have been just as colorful and intricately detailed when they were fresh, and that those frail details were just lost to the passage of time. The details are lost, and all that remains is the most basic understructure of what once was there. And because the fine details are lost, mainstream history looks to them as primitive in design. Perhaps the older the site, the more details are lost, and so the more primitive it is labeled by the quackademia. creating a false sense of progress in our minds. In just a few thousand years, in most cases, materials we associate with civilization, like metal, wood, glass, or even plastics and rubbers, could all be turned to dust without a trace. All that would be left is the stone. And maybe that's why the further you go back in the mainstream history, the more it paints a picture of this kind of Stone Age, where humans were just too dumb, too unevolved to have technology. Really, I think we have no idea what the past was truly like. And it will remain that way for as long as we limit ourselves to only material-based thinking.
Your shadow fell upon my lonely room. I touched your golden hair and tasted your perfume. Your eyes were filled with love the way they used to be. Your gentle hand reached out to comfort me. Then came the dawn. Gone. You were gone, gone, gone. I had too much to drink last night. Too much to drink. I'm not ready to face the light. I had too much to drink last night. Empty as I staggered from my bed. I could not bear the image racing through my head. You were so real that I could feel your eagerness. And when you raised your lips for me to kiss, take the gong, and you were gone. You were gone, gone, gone. I had too much to drink last night. Too much to drink. I'm not ready to face the light. I had too much to drink.